I stood motionless on the damp grass, my boots locked onto the dirt, while Marcus sneered and tossed a pair of worn leather sparring gloves directly at my feet. Behind him, his father let out a booming, guttural laugh that seemed to vibrate straight through the humid summer air. "Teach this pathetic excuse for a soldier a lesson, son. Show her that around here, my money is the absolute law." I looked past them at the cluster of relatives who were eagerly waiting to see my daughter and me crushed. Overseas, strangers in uniform had taken bullets to shield me, yet right here on American soil, my own family was driving the deepest knives into my back. They had no idea that cornering a specialized combat veteran was not a display of power, but an immediate death sentence for their arrogant empire. 10 years of my life were spent in hostile war zones where the air constantly tasted like burnt copper, diesel fuel, and raw survival. I earned every single stripe through brutal deployments, deep tactical operations, and nerve-wracking close calls that left permanent scars across my body. As a senior risk analyst and tactical specialist for military intelligence, my entire career was built around identifying threats before they materialized and neutralizing danger with absolute precision. People I served alongside trusted me with their lives because I never panicked under pressure, and I never missed a critical detail. But when I finally retired to a quiet residential neighborhood, I buried that entire life behind a wall of classified security clearances. I deliberately let my family believe I was just a low-level office clerk handling basic administrative paperwork for a modest government paycheck. That cover story was essential because my ultimate priority was raising my young daughter Maya in total peace and safety. Every single morning began with the same comforting routine as I stood by the kitchen window, sipping dark coffee while watching Maya play in the yard. Yet even in the quietest suburban neighborhood, my tactical instincts never truly turned off. I constantly mapped the perimeter, calculated sight lines from the main road, and timed every vehicle that drove past our property line. That sense of tranquility lasted 4 months before a massive fleet of moving trucks pulled up next door, followed by a glaring black luxury SUV. Richard Vance, a ruthless logistics mogul who built a massive fortune by liquidating smaller shipping firms, had purchased the massive estate right across our shared wooden fence. Richard was the kind of man who measured human worth strictly by the balance in a bank account. Joining him was his adult son, Drake, a hot-headed amateur fighter packed with muscle and driven by an uncontrollable temper. To make matters worse, my younger sister Chloe had married Drake a year prior, trading her self-respect for expensive designer clothes and a flashy lifestyle. Drake immediately installed a heavy punching bag right against our property line, letting every explosive strike rattle the walls of my home. I watched his sloppy technique from my window, silently cataloging every mistake in his guard and every flaw in his footwork. He was a man accustomed to intimidating everyday civilians, completely oblivious to the fact that his new neighbor was trained to dismantle opponents in total darkness. Within 2 weeks, Richard and Drake began treating the entire cul-de-sac like their personal fiefdom. Drake intentionally pushed elderly neighbors off the sidewalk, left heavy equipment blocking the road, and dared anyone on the block to utter a single word of complaint. Chloe dropped by my house without warning, strutting through the front door just to parade her expensive diamond rings and boast about her upcoming home renovations. She looked at my plain furniture with total disdain, offering passive-aggressive comments about how my humble income was holding me back from achieving real success. I simply maintained a steady pulse, swallowed my anger, and let her empty insults fade into the room, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. The real flashpoint occurred on a sweltering afternoon while Maya was sitting in our driveway, quietly washing my car with a small sponge and a bucket of soapy water. Drake stomped across the grass, shirtless and aggressive, furious over the volume of the small portable radio sitting on my dashboard. Without saying a word, he reached through the open window, ripped the radio unit from the console, and slammed it down onto the concrete. As the plastic shattered, he leaned directly into my terrified daughter's face, barking a harsh warning that made her freeze in absolute terror. I watched the entire incident from the porch, and within a single second, my internal threat assessment shifted from passive observation to immediate tactical response. I walked down the driveway with a slow, deliberate stride, keeping my hands loose and my center of gravity perfectly balanced. I snapped just out of his reach, looking him dead in the eye, and told him in an ice-cold voice never to touch my property or speak to my daughter again. Drake let out a dismissive laugh, towering over me while boasting about his physical size and mocking my quiet civilian life. I chose not to escalate the situation right then, prioritizing Maya's immediate safety while escorting her back inside the house. But as I held my trembling daughter, I silently added Drake to my tactical objective list, knowing his unchecked aggression would eventually force a final reckoning. That breaking point arrived during an over-the-top backyard party Richard threw to celebrate Drake winning a regional sparring tournament. The deep bass from their commercial speakers shook my living room walls, interrupting a small study session Maya was hosting with 3 of her school friends. Drake noticed the young girls sitting at our picnic table and decided to put on an aggressive show, throwing wild kicks over the wooden fence and intentionally snapping the branches of my flowering bushes. When the girls ran inside frightened, I stepped out into the yard and firmly demanded that he take his loud performance somewhere else. Enraged at being challenged in front of his guests, Drake charged across the property line, grabbed my shirt collar, and threatened to break my neck. In less than half a second, my military muscle memory took complete control. I pivoted my hips to neutralize his momentum, clamped onto his wrist, and slammed my thumb into a sensitive nerve cluster along his forearm while forcing his elbow joint upward. The sudden, intense pressure forced him straight to his knees, gasping for air as his grip collapsed instantly. I released the hold just as quickly, taking 2 steps back and feigning total confusion, loudly asking if he had tripped on an exposed tree root. Drake scrambled to his feet, red-faced and humiliated, vowing to destroy me in front of everyone before stomping back to his side of the fence. An hour later, Richard, Drake, and Chloe marched onto my lawn alongside several intoxicated party guests, determined to publicly humiliate me. Richard loudly proclaimed that his wealth bought total immunity, demanding that I step into their backyard ring to settle the insult or face an endless barrage of legal and financial destruction. Drake tossed a pair of heavy fighting gloves at my boots, sneering that he was going to send me to the emergency room in front of my little girl. I looked down at the gloves, then looked at my sister, who was standing there smirking, fully expecting me to beg for mercy. Instead, I calmly picked up the gloves, pulled them onto my hands, and stepped past the fence line, ready to drop the peaceful facade I had maintained for years. The crowd encircled us, shouting and laughing as Drake bounced on his toes, dropping his guard just like he always did when he felt overconfident. The moment he lunged forward with a heavy wild right hook, I ducked effortlessly underneath his arm, sliding into his guard with terrifying speed. I drove a sharp palm strike directly into his solar plexus, knocking the wind straight out of his lungs before executing a sweeping kick that brought his entire weight crashing down onto the grass. Before he could recover, I transitioned into a tight, flawless ground control position, locking his arm in a submission hold that left him completely immobilized and tapping the ground in desperate panic. The entire backyard fell into a stunned, absolute silence as the powerful young fighter whimpered on the turf, unable to break my grip. I leaned down close to his ear, informing him in a low whisper that his illusion of strength was completely over, and that if he ever targeted my family again, the consequences would be permanent. I released him, stood up effortlessly, and turned my gaze toward Richard, whose smug expression had completely vanished into pure shock. I wiped the dust from my hands, looked my sister directly in the eyes, and told them all that their endless games were officially finished. The following morning, I placed a direct phone call to a former commander currently serving in federal law enforcement, providing specific details regarding Richard's questionable corporate shipping records. Within 3 weeks, federal auditors and investigative teams descended upon Lewis Global Transport, freezing their assets and uncovering years of systematic fraud. Their extravagant estate was put up for public auction, and the arrogant family that tried to intimidate my home was forced to pack their bags and leave the neighborhood in total disgrace. Standing on my porch with Maya, watching their moving trucks permanently drive away, I was reminded that real strength never needs to shout, and true peace is something worth defending with everything you have.